Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of HBA Global Insights. Today, I have my good friend Dr. Chris Lockwood on the horn here with me. Chris is the Vice President of Scientific Affairs at Nutrabolt, which is located here in Austin, Texas, and that's where I am. Chris, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you, Jeff?
There he is. I'm doing
Thanks
fine.
for having me.
I'm more than welcome. Thanks for participating in this and sharing your knowledge. Today we're going to talk about, as you can, saw from the title, we're going to talk about research and development, kind of putting the research into the development and, and innovating and creating new products. Chris is an expert at that. All right, and for those of you that have not met Chris yet, or have seen him at a show or speak or anything like that, just want him to kind of give a quick introduction to himself.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, unlike most people in my position that maybe have gone more vertical from, getting their PhDs and then getting into a research-based role. I mean, I've from back in the muscle and fitness days when Joe Weider, when Weider family was the big player on the block in the industry. I've run sports nutrition brands as a brand manager, so hence the ABB. Behind me was the first one I took over and flipped. I've been a writer and an editor in chief at Muscle and Fitness and Muscle and Fitness Hers before going back for my PhD. I've run the diet division at GNC back when Royal Numico owned them, and we flipped the company, and then everything in between. And so, having been in the industry for the last better part of 25, 30 years, just seeing the changes and being in companies that had like the FDA consent decrees, knowing and being around some amazingly brilliant mentors and people that don't get enough credit today for like the trails that they paved on the way. I just had some amazing people to learn from, and so I try to take that into what I do here. And with the opportunity you're giving me to kind of share what my version of 2.0 to hopefully make my mentors, and people that help, teach me along the way, that I've taken what I've been taught, what I've observed, and hopefully helping lead the industry in another new direction. And I've had the support here at Nutrabolt to inform, to implement it in a way that is really unique in the industry, to allow us to blaze a trail. So that's what I wanted to cover today, and hopefully get more companies, following the suit. So from a standpoint of being able to see a sustainable industry, and also that kind of symbiosis of ingredient companies working with brands and really driving the industry and providing the credibility and the efficacy safety research that the regulators want to see, and that from a risk management keeps the litigators at bay. Really is a good sustainable business plan that thus far has worked really well in the last 2.5, 3 years that I've been implementing it since being full time at Nutrabolt.
So Chris has put together a nice presentation for us here to kind of run through that and show how that, flow works. So Chris, go ahead and bring that up.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Appreciate it. Let's see. There we go. All right, Jeff. So just I'll give kind of a case study. This might be the easiest way to show like what we've put forward and as a model for bringing research into the development process in the supplement industry, and how we identified a novel new ingredient. How I identified a novel new ingredient and worked with that ingredient company for better part of 3 years to get them to the point where we could launch a product that included that ingredient, and with research prior to commercialization, efficacy and safety research to fine tune the final formula, and then to get actual claim substantiation and published research behind that. So I'll walk you through this. So McKinsey and company, have identified that there's this, big push. And so just sort of background, and this is probably old news to a lot of people here in the trade, but as far as the need for data driven. So consumers are wanting to see more of that. And I think that the real interesting part of this has been the shift that's happened in this space. I won't bore you with this, but obviously who's driving purchases in this space, and so who that consumer is. But this is so if you look at that McKinsey quote that I had up a second ago, and like that in our space in the vitamin supplements, there's just been this massive shift since 2020, and I'll let everybody else just kind of put it in your minds of what probably happened then. That now what they used to want to see was that it had organic and it had all the little call signs on, that it was not tested in unicorns or whatever it was that was the call out. Now the consumer is overwhelmingly wanting to see the evidence that the product does what it claims it does, which bodes well for people like me who's been doing research on products and paving that way for years, to try to get more companies doing this. And so, when you look at like what the barriers have been, and having been at companies and consulted for ones, there's kind of the common things that come up is to create new intellectual property. So start from finish, like actually coming up with new ingredients. Not as it take creative people who understand, what could move the landscape and what is true innovation and patentable IP. But also, there is a serious investment in time. The clinical research side is quite expensive, and so people often see that as why they don't invest in it. The time, as I mentioned before, just there is significant resources, expertise. A lot of companies don't have the personnel. I, started at a company, Weeder Nutrition, back in the day. We had a huge budget for clinical research, and this predates, full implementation of GMPs. But when I was running this brand, first company that had a consent decree in our space, prior to me coming on, just halfway. But the interesting thing I saw is we were investing so much in this amazing research by brilliant people with PhDs, both on the industry side and academic side, but neither understanding each other. So when I came along as a brand manager, coming from marketing and having worked in the publication side, and so having to make science simple to an eighth grade level, for people to be empowered by, I saw that we were investing in studies that you couldn't talk about, right? I mean, it was cancer research and other things that FDA was going to say you can't market that. And so getting, an understanding of the study designs and what you can actually do, like that's a dance that, people on both sides need to understand the clinical research, the process and things, and be able to talk each other's language, to effectively do research without wasting money and time. And then the cost to benefit, ratio obviously must be there. And so you can invest money in this, and if the financials don't make sense, you're not going to be able to sustain that. And so I often, will talk with, the accounting side and the legal side of companies when I consulted and was doing this, or internally, just the amount of risk management that this supports, right? I mean, to come after a company that has invested in clinical research on finished products, that is a far safer play for a company long term. You've built up a better dossier than just borrowed science from other things. Now, there's always going to be times where we borrow science to formulate products, but for your hero products, it makes a lot of sense to sit there and have this. One of the interesting parts about that, as far as again, is that when McKinsey and Company, and another thing that they looked at on the greatest ROI. Now, this was in for pharma, but I think it applies for us as well, as we look to try to navigate a similar portfolio of being more innovative, truly doing research in advance. Is that having personnel on staff with that expertise in clinical research makes a huge difference on having a true, beneficial ROI. The costs go up exponentially, when you don't have people who've done, the published research, the actual in the trenches data collection, so they don't understand how to develop these strategies to get to the finish line, with good, reliable, valid data. and not waste money. So some of the things that when I look at the investment solutions that we had, then to your point, Jeff, is that the there are like there's going to be some formulas where you just put together ingredients other people have done the work on. The fear always with those with the true with the full transparency is you kind of circle the drain of who can get to the lowest price fastest. So, you kind of drag the entire category down based on that. And so, what I had proposed is, hey, how about let's develop our own IP? Let's go out and find, I'm in literature all the time trying to find, new ingredients. And then whether I develop them with outside chemists and R&D groups that, we look to do the investment on and bringing those to market. And that's a longer play, whether it's working with companies that are already publishing research on their ingredient and moving it forward. And we just need to then go work with them on getting it, to the finish line, to the consumer side, or whether it is, going out and working with your raw material companies that invest in research and saying, hey, let's collaborate together. Let's bring some new IP together. We'll be your partner for that. We have the ability to, we have the patience to do that. We're going to invest in the clinical research. I've set up, the internal and external research resources that we can do proof of concept testing quickly. And everything from the in vitro side to in vivo to biopsies to you name it. And so having that kind of collaboration and partnership. So this is kind of what I've proposed and put together. And so when I look at like an example on the ingredient IP, we'll use this D9 Designs with this new deuterated caffeine. I remember reading a research manuscript back in 2022, I believe it was. It was the first time I came across it, and then read the full manuscript and was able to dissect and find who was behind it, funding it, and then reaching out and doing my old sales guy tactic of dialing for dollars, find who are the people involved, and once they could kind of take me seriously on, hey, I'd like to work with you guys on coming to market with something, working with them on what they needed to do to meet the GRAS self-affirmation and other documentation that we would need as a company like Nutrabolt to feel comfortable doing a licensing agreement and launching with that ingredient, what kind of safety, toxicity, data we would need as well. Um, the other partnerships and then creating. So one of the partnerships that I created was supporting that a university lab. So I work with Dr. Michael Roberts' lab within the kinesiology school at Auburn. We have an ongoing, annual research gift that we work with them. I think it's super important to have this, academic and industry partnerships and relationships. Not only is it just to help provide, a laboratory that you can utilize, but it also then, creates, for, the next evolution of people that go through those programs that maybe they don't want to stay in industry and academia and they're wanting to go into industry, or it drives that, our field of research more, more fuel to create the next innovations through future students that are the ones that are going to carry this torch down the road. I mean, we can't assume that it's just that we're the smartest people and there's not going to be anything to follow if that's so this entire kind of setup is to try to again to not only come up with new IP quickly and support new product development in a very real world very fast paced market, but to continue looking at it in the medium term and long term, like how do we keep growing this industry and creating new innovation, for years to come. And so, and then so we have that partnership at Auburn, which is just an amazing, opportunity, the resource for us. And then thirdly, I created internal labs. So the first one I created was with the University of Health Performance, which is outside of Bentonville, so Walmart's backyard, but it's a military veteran supported group, and so I created a laboratory there. When they have courses, I perform clinical research, we do education, and I mean, these are military veterans. To the mission, generally there is to reduce the suicide rate. So I thoroughly, and they're wanting to get a second career using these GI funds to get a career in fitness. And so to go and teach and work with them and then help, show them, true, valid testing, what is true exercise testing look like, and then actually performing clinical research out there. Thus far in the first 18 months that I built, that first facility, I completed 6 clinical studies. We two on 2 new ingredients, filed 1 patent, launched 2 brand new products, and then 2 reformulations that we were able to do. Saved us just over $440,000 in 18 months, as opposed to if we tried to do that through universities. And frankly, to do that much research within 6 months at a university is just not likely, right? And so we're able to speed that process up using outside IRBs. So there is an IRB process that we use. And then we, perform the same level of credible research that you would at any other, university stance. And so the C4 alpha bomb was a product that included that D9 caffeine. And so I'll kind of walk you through that as a good case study on and how from identifying this new ingredient, working through the process of, getting to the point of where we could put it in some prototype formulations, doing some early testing to fine tune the formula, and then doing a full on, a much larger IRB study that we ended up publishing, presenting at ACSM conferences and then publishing. And right now we're finishing up the manuscript, the full research manuscript to submit. So, what is a perform, internally. And by the way, I created a second laboratory in our new facility there in Austin. Jeff, I again invite you to come, and we'll, put you through some tests out of that one. You're always welcome to come out to the one in Bentonville area. I love, spending time out there as well. But, it's a full, functioning exercise physiology lab, so we can do true performance stuff. I'm not, collecting tissue and things. So it's, minimally invasive stuff, but, all gold standard testing, metabolic carts, full 4 compartment, 5 compartment body composition. So gold standard, body comp testing, combining different things. And so we can do a whole host of tests, and it's not as expensive as people may assume it would be, if you know what you're needing to purchase and what kind of, clinical studies you're going to need to do to support the types of claims that generally are going to be out there, right? And so I won't waste your time on kind of everything that kind of goes into it, but I will say it's no small undertaking, but it's also not the investment most people might think. I mean, like, this laboratory in itself, outside of the space itself, you're in it for under $250,000, for all the types of equipment that we have, including, but you can't see, ultrasounds, for blood flow and muscle thickness, or EMGs, IMUs, so you can look at muscle activation, and then, the metabolic carts, for VO2 testing and energy expenditure and other types of performance, ventilatory threshold type testing, or you name it. We've got, several, different capabilities here that we can do: reaction time testing, neurocognitive performance testing, and things. So the case study I'll provide, I mean, so years ago, I came across, these studies on this new type of caffeine, a deuterated caffeine. Deuterium is just a fancy name for heavy hydrogen. We all learned hydrogen in the periodic table, but in this case, deuterium appears in nature, less than 1% of the time, but it's just a heavier hydrogen form. This company had done some work and filed patents on being able to use a deuterated caffeine. That means that they've replaced a certain number of the hydrogens naturally in caffeine with deuterium forms of that hydrogen, right? The heavier hydrogen. And what you see, and this goes back, I've been aware of this research, since the early 90s, 80s time period of, showing deuterating certain actives had a certain pharmacokinetic response, which I'd always been really fascinated with. So when I saw this one in particular, make a resurgence, and it was definitely more in our space, I reached out to them and we started this, relationship about 3 years ago. This is just some background in deuterium. So as a novel ingredient, obviously they have to do their work on the innovation side. And I'm using this as the example as opposed to some of the other ingredients that I've come up with and that have working with, outside groups, or that, we're working with, some of our existing raw material suppliers with on bringing to market. Intellectual property that some of our raw material companies have in other, international markets, but didn't even realize, were that their sister companies had, and so trying to get those like ready to commercialize here in the U.S. Um, again, like some of the pharmacokinetics that's fascinating about this one is just this kind of sustained response from caffeine at a much lower dose. So, actually, this one was on a comparable molecular weight dose. But what you'll see is there is this ability. There's some follow-up studies that they did on doses, comparing a lower dose to a higher dose of regular caffeine anhydrous and showing effects. And so, we kind of looked at this, 4.4 times, greater efficacy from this D9 caffeine. And so then design, some early preliminary studies to fine tune the formula. We finally get to a formula we felt comfortable with based on some early pilot studies that I did, and some market research, studies that we did on just, your subjective responses. And then we, set up and I filed an IRB, for this through one of the third party IRBs. And we conducted this trial out of the UHP facility with the students that were going through a course. So it covers everything. It's very much similar to the types of clinical research I did during my PhD, and, other, research studies that those of us that have done them are familiar with. It definitely takes time, and you better have, some energy levels to be back to being a grad student, and the times I didn't think at my age I'd be back doing wet labbing and spending, 20 hours a day in the lab and crunching numbers and doing this, but totally dig it. I mean, it's like reminds me of why I enjoy being a strength coach and personal trainer, is like working one-on-one and really having that feedback with people. Nothing beats it. I mean, and so we did this study out of that lab. I had two, so it was Rocky and Emma as my research assistants. These were UHP grad students, veterans themselves, that I then train as interns. They were interested in, learning about the process and seeing if they wanted to pursue a graduate degree. Neither of them had had any research experience before, so it was cool to be able to intern and train some people. Emma's going on to interested in pursuing her PhD. Rocky, that guy's crushing it in his master's degree. And so awesome to be able to provide that opportunity for our veterans and these UHB students that are looking for this as a second career, to understand, hey, if you're going to be a coach and use this data, what does it actually mean for us as a company? It gives us the opportunity, to support claims, see efficacy. So we go through, and what we find is, it had significant effects on, certain areas of performance, no significant cardiovascular or safety risks, which are great, right? I mean, we look at nothing different than caffeine alone. And then you start looking at like what benefits. And so from a substantiation for our marketing team, to come to market with and to build upon for future studies, because that's the point, right? To go out and go to a university later and validate, you want to take some things. So we look at, its effects on mood and, and feeling more invigorated. And then you start looking at the performance variables on the tests we did, which, I won't bore you with the certain types of tests. I mean, I had guys that were laid up on the floor after these. These were, you had to beat them down, to be able to test these. And those are always fun, which, by the way, I always demand myself and my research assistants, we all go through the protocol multiple times before a study to pilot it, so we know what we're asking of people. as well. So I don't say that laughingly that people ended up on the floor. I was one of them when I was doing, the test dummy for helping the research assistants learn the protocol so we could all do the test right. And then, so we found some great data. We ended up presenting it at the ACSM, Texas ACSM. So before we could, if you're familiar with doing clinical research, before you can market it, so you don't ruin your chances of getting peer review publication, you need to go and present it, get it out there. And so we went and defended it at an ACSM conference, and now we're working on the manuscripts. But this within its first 4 weeks that it was out there, it ranked within the top 15 of all post workouts. It's doing even better now. This is a little dated. This is about 6 weeks old. This number here, so brand new out there in GNC is an exclusive with them. They're super excited about it. So to support a partner, our marketing team crushed it. Our sales team has done amazing, out there in the endemic market. And so we're looking to grow this brand as well. I'm a believer, that what we do, does have significant benefits when it's done right. What's most frustrating are the companies that just step in for the quick return on investment of doing nothing and stealing from other people, and then making it much harder on the rest of us you know, that are here for the long haul and want to see it grow and see it advance. And so here to
Mm.
help any way I can. So
Well, this is, I think, in the overall scheme or industry, I should say, of supplements, nowhere more so is this relevant than in the sports nutrition category. The people that buy these products expect either immediate results in like, so we're looking at like a pre-workout. I'm going to take this. Did it give me energy? Did it do
yep,
what it was supposed to do right away? And then maybe, other things that like help with building muscle. This is going to be weeks down the road, but and creatine and all these other kind of ingredients come up to play there. But the rest of the industry, you're taking supplements to help your immune system. That's a real slow tick, and it's not an immediate like, oh my gosh, I feel wonderful.
yeah.
I mean, they may be very beneficial and have efficacy over time, but sports nutrition is I think still kind of a little bit of the Wild Wild West because it's got some great stuff that's been proven, but it's also got some garbage in it, and it's also got every kind of facet of it. But the consumers are the ones that are really kind of leading the charge for that. And I just want to touch base on one of the things you mentioned early on, showing that graph of who's kind of, pushing this and what do they want? Do they, the people that just wanted before they wanted the organic seal or some other thing. Now they're looking at efficacy and does this thing really work? And I believe there's like the millennials or I don't know who was up on that chart, who was
Yeah.
pushing that. But what do you think that the reason for that is? I mean, it's reasonable to want that from a product, but do you think like did COVID have something to do that? That people really started looking at their health more intensely and wanting to buy things that worked, or did that have any effect, do you think?
Yeah, and so I was trying to be coy, and probably my joke didn't, come across. But yeah, I do think it was COVID. I think that we internationally all told to kind of do this and take this, and this will do this, and then there's been enough independent thinking, that saw like, oof, maybe I'm not being told the truth, and it's really in since those time. I mean, whether it's the Joe Rogans or whether it's other people that have been out there to make this entire, or in light of the Charlie Kirk passing, is that there have been people that have said, let's go beyond this. Like, I mean, there's definitely kind of a narrative, and then there's, which is or marketing, and then there's go investigate for yourself. I mean, those of us that have been in the trenches doing substantiation investigation for our careers for years, in my case almost 3 decades. I mean, it is great to see the evolution. To borrow from one of my early mentors, so Joe Weider, the guy behind Arnold in the picture here, he used to say, and I'll do my best Joe Weider voice, like, oh, it always takes the old fogies a decade to die out for things to move forward just a little bit more, right? I mean, and it's like, I do think that there is some of that that's going on, right? Is that it's just the natural evolution that people are
Mhm.
wanting to be more informed consumers, and that's awesome. So here, how can you be that person leading that charge? I mean, I will say you made a great point just a minute ago before I answered that is, we were just talking about like, the companies, in this space and, kind of referred to this sports nutrition as the Wild West, but people are wanting to see, that things work. I mean, I think that there's, the one, aspect of this is that, yeah, is that people will investigate. Let's say they take Creapure creatine, right? And they see like, oh, okay, this German, creatine, they've invested, millions and millions, and they were really the leading the charge in micronized creatine and all the data that's out there, and labs will use them. And so, how much should I take? Well, the studies here show 5 grams, and I'm not. And so I was on a panel with some other folks at Supply Side a couple of years ago on using co-branded ingredients, and I'm all for that when that company is invested. I mean, it's easy to file a trademark and put, you don't need any research to file a trademark. You just need to be creative and be willing to spend money on a trademark. So you could be able to use a Tommy Boy reference, you could stamp, a trademark on a bag of piece of crap, and it's still just nothing but, a trademark bag of crap. And so the looking at companies that have invested in the research, for that branded ingredient, I think is been an awesome step. So in this transparency labeling, right? Full transparency.
Mhm.
Again, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just making new evolutions of it. When in the 90s, again, my mentors at Weeder with a brand called Metaform, the first GNC exclusive brand, they trademarked truth in labeling. So when I took over that brand in 2000, um, uh, it had already was doing full disclosure. I mean, and it's like, okay, just now it's made a new evolution, and mainly because companies aren't investing in finished product research. Well, my fear with that is that when you invest, when you just do branded ingredients at the doses, right? Is that now you're gonna, as most brands, and you've seen this, is that you start going back to that raw material company to beat them up on better pricing, whatever it is, because there's really not a lot more you can do to compete against those other brands. And so investment in finished product. Now, if you invest in finished product research, now some of the raw material companies aren't going to like to hear what I'm about to say, is that if I invest in finished product research and I show that my finished product is safe and increases, let's just, performance by 70%, acutely one use, right? Pre-workout, whatever that variable might be. Do I need to use branded ingredients or can I leverage, getting an unbranded ingredient, doing studies with unbranded ingredients and putting those in there because I've shown the efficacy and safety of my finished product. To me, investing in research in a truly like symbiotic way as a brand is the equivalent of I can go to a contract manufacturer and say, give me your white label, formula for pre-workout, right? And I'm at their mercy. I don't know the raw material company. I don't know the flavor system. And you can get all that with the right supply agreement, but you really are at the mercy. If you tried to go to another manufacturer, you got to start from scratch. And most companies are stuck, right?
Mhm.
So in my case, you invest in the actual finished product research. Your ability then to change things and having the ability internally as you make new formulation modifications. Let's say that you switch out a raw material. Let's say you change your formula just from a cost standpoint. You need to do something different. Um, what a great way to quickly be able to assess it as long as you know how to design studies and actually administer them in a very reliable, valid way. Like it speeds that process up. And I show this internally is that like when I do a university study, you from start to finish, you're looking at 6 to 8 months, right? If you just as a crossover study, meaning an acute response, same subject repeats the same thing, like from start to finish, it's a long process. I mean, this case study I provided you, from the time that we did the first formula and did pilot studies and then the full study and then published, presented at the ACSM conference in February. It was 4 months. I mean, which is unheard of to most people. I mean, like, and you know me enough, Jeff. I mean, you know, I'm not, I don't spend a lot of time in my bed. And so, but, so you got to have people willing to hump it and move. But like it does speed up your ability to move in big ways quickly if you've got the right staffing. So
Mhm. Well, before we wrap this up, I just want to touch on a couple other points you've mentioned, and throughout this whole process, we've heard the word trademark and patent. Um, all this is going to revolve around, the return on investment and protection. So trademark, just as I understand it, just a simple, you're just, Jeff's potion. That's my magic potion. I'm trademark the name, and no one can use that name, and it's on the side of the bottle. Um, but patents, because we're dealing with natural products, so we're dealing with some vitamins, minerals, botanical extracts, a lot of these things, because they're considered natural, you can't really patent them. So can you explain, like, at what point does that patent come in? Is it the manufacturing process of that, or the combination of with something else, or how does that come into play?
excellent point. Yeah, it's composition and use, right? I mean, because we work with natural products, so you can't, patent a naturally occurring ingredient, right? But the process to extract it, isolate it, whatever, synthesize it, whatever case may be, and then the composition, how you wrap that around in combination with other ingredients, to then cause some kind of effect. I mean, you had mentioned you talked with Dr. Andrew Show, in another um, episode. I mean, so Andrew Bennett with Frank, and with what's going on with invalidation of like their patents. My suggestion is always find an amazing patent attorney, right, that understands those, and I those nuances of being able to take natural ingredients. Hey, how do we create a strong position that to your point, this is a natural ingredient. What do we need to do? Here's how it's going to be used uniquely. And so it doesn't say that, you're never going to have somebody try to violate that patent. Some company isn't going to try to, process it a different way, combine it slightly different, outside of those parameters that you fine tune within your patent filings. But yeah, you can, there are absolute avenues to create a strong, good patent for combination and use. I'm simplifying the terminology there, but uh,
Okay.
that's the way I would look at it. That's how I've done them in the past with mine. So,
Yeah, because I think you used a really great example, and I've worked with them in the past. They were actually a member of our association years ago, Creapure, the
yep.
Alzchem team in Germany, and they spent a lot of time and effort and capital to perfect their creatine, and the purity of it was the real standout part of that compared to other creatines. But creatine is now manufactured all over the place. Specifically, China has tons of companies pumping out creatine. So um, you know, I guess at some point you have to sit back and say, well, we want to make this product. So like this started years ago. You found this, a clinical trial that you read over that later came to fruition of you creating and working with this company. But, looking down the road, how much money are we dumping into this project? And is it ours? Or is as soon as it hits the market, everyone's going to come out and just copy it and not spend a dime?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. I mean, I will say, like, I've tried at least internally with my department to just, to justify, what I do is, quantify, okay, if we did this research elsewhere, or you know, and that's where when I bring up like in just clinical studies, I can tell you that, having done enough clinical studies and like I've, in indirect costs, if you're not familiar with these terms, I apologize. Indirect costs at a university is a fancy way of saying margin but being a not-for-profit, they have to call it something different, but it's a indirect cost or margins for universities. I mean, so like I try to always do that ROI of okay, just research to research. If you actually pulled it to the product itself and looking at sales of that product and like all in, where are we at? Like that kind of P&L, I'll say this outright. It is a request that I've got like with Nutrabolt that we should be, being able to kind of dial those in. I can tell you like back in the old Weeder days, like product P&Ls, and drawing everything into it was something I was absolutely bored with as a brand manager, but I definitely can appreciate it now. I mean, like you truly look at like all costs in and time and amortizing those things, the investment that you've done, like yeah, what is that? And so at the current moment, I can't tell you like for these, like I don't have a true amortized, all in P&L on like the C4 alpha bomb versus everything that's gone in, or for some of these other innovations that I'm working on new ingredients, that are coming up here in November, and then into beginning of the new year, we'll do our we'll start the same like finished like product type stuff, and so like it's been a 3 year process and investment in outside chemistry, groups and filing those patents and things. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely that investment. And I think that, barrier to entry is not a bad thing, like for our industry, like, because right now there's very little, right? I mean, you can go white label any brand and anybody can knock that off. And as long as you seem legit, you're going to probably convince somebody to buy, right? The good news, I think, is that there is this kind of changing and this trend towards, as that McKinsey thing, suggests, has been a big shift of show me, you know, show me the money, so to speak, to use an old,
I was
uh,
waiting for
yeah, I was gonna,
that.
yeah. So I was trying to think of another one that I could use, but that's really the best one I could think of. Is you got to show me the money. I mean, show me that it works. Don't just tell me. And so, and I think that there's going to be. I like to believe like what I'm doing is crazy cool. I enjoy it. I think it's cool to bring up to create new things, doing the research, putting all those things, testing things. Not every as those graphs I showed you, Jeff, not everything we tested showed out to be that it was effective at those things. I mean, but that's part of that discovery. And as I look at like a follow-up study for that product at a university, as we've been talking, like there were certain things that the product didn't really move the needle on. And it was like, okay, well, when we take it to a bigger, let's not waste money on these areas because it doesn't look like there weren't even trends in certain things. And so I think that that's, important. That part of discovery is going to save you money and allow you to focus more on what's going to move the needle more effectively. So when you do communicate to consumers on the product, the expectation of what they should expect from it is realistic. You had made the comment that the immune system, I mean, to sell somebody an immune system, they're not going to feel it like an acute type product. 1,000% correct, right? I mean, I love that you said that because I'm about to say you got one bottle to sell somebody once, right? I mean, whatever that happens to be. If it's an energy drink, you got like, pre-workout, one time for them to feel some effect. If it is like, to use like in our space, like glutamine, right? I mean, nobody's going to be feeling glutamine with a first dose of glutamine, but you're taking like I take, 10 grams at least twice a day, just more on the GI side and to help with other things. You know, 30 days later, do you go look back and man, like definitely notice a difference. It's those products that have to take, subchronically, and you have to take it, beyond that 30 days. Like you're gonna have to sell them on that a second time. And I think showing consumers' expectations is where we're doing research on that, like to say, like, stick with it. Like, I mean, it's a good investment if this is what your goal is. And I think the brands that end up investing in that will find those returns are there if they can tell that story effectively and use that science correctly. So,
Hmm. Well, I think we've been chewing our ears off here for quite a while. This is awesome stuff, as always. And thanks so
yeah,
much for all the insights. into your work and what you're doing and what you believe in. That's awesome stuff.
No, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy. Looking forward to seeing you next time I come out to Austin.
All right, sounds good, man. All
All
right,
right.
well, to the viewers, thanks for joining us. And as Chris mentioned, if you do want, have any questions or anything, there'll be a card at the end of the video with his details and his email, etc. So give him a shout out. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Jeff.